All right, let's dive into a really transformative and, yeah, often turbulent period in American history. We're going to be talking about the explosion of industry and the incredible rise of organized labor that came right along with it.
And this right here is the big question we're going to tackle. Because the story of America's industrial age is absolutely a story of amazing growth, but it's also a story of immense human cost.
Okay, so where does this all begin? Well, it starts with the first major force of change, the sheer, unstoppable engine of industry in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
I mean, just try to picture this. A whole country is transforming right before your very eyes. Factories were just popping up everywhere. Cities were booming, and all these new industrial centers created this massive, unprecedented demand for workers to run the machines and keep that growth going.
And this demand for workers, man, it was like a giant magnet. It was pulling in millions of immigrants from all over the world. And it was also drawing Americans from their farms out in the countryside into these packed, bustling cities, all of them looking for a job in a factory. So you've got all this crazy growth happening. You might be wondering, where was the government in all this? Well, their policy was basically hands-off. Let's see what that really meant.
They called this policy laissez-faire, and in practice, what it really meant was that the government just stayed out of the way. It gave big businesses an almost completely free hand to operate and expand with very, very few rules.
And the result was this stark contrast, a tale of two completely different realities. On one side, laissez-faire policies let corporations just balloon into these massive monopolies and trusts that controlled entire industries. But on the other side, for the average worker, this lack of regulation meant dangerously unsafe workplaces, grueling hours, ridiculously low pay, and even widespread child labor.
So, faced with this dramatic imbalance of power, what were workers supposed to do? Well, they started to organize. They started to build a new kind of power for themselves.
You see, labor unions didn't just appear out of thin air. No, they were a direct response to these incredibly harsh conditions. Think about it. One single worker trying to argue with a massive company. You have zero leverage. But together, suddenly you have a voice. You have power.
And their goals were actually pretty fundamental. They weren't asking for the world, They just wanted some basic human dignity. Things like shrinking the grueling 10 or 12-hour workday down to 8 hours, getting fair pay for their hard labor, demanding safer working conditions, and, an end to widespread child labor.
Okay, so we know what they wanted. But how are they planning to get it? Let's take a look at their game plan.
The unions developed a pretty clear playbook. Their main tactic was collective bargaining, negotiating as a unified group, not as individuals. When that didn't work, they used their ultimate weapon, the strike, where everyone would walk off the job to halt production completely. And to get the public on their side, they organized boycotts.
Now, this push for workers' rights was met with some fierce opposition. This wasn't a peaceful negotiation. A lot of the time, it was an outright battle.
The business owners, they looked at these unions and saw a direct threat. A threat to their control, a threat to their profits, and they were not about to give up that power easily. So the resistance was immediate, and it was often brutal. And that backlash was severe. You had strikes that turned into incredibly violent clashes between workers and the private security forces hired by the companies. And here's the kicker. When the government did finally step in, more often than not, it took the side of big business, not the laborers.
So you see how it all connects, right? It's like a chain reaction. You have this unchecked industrial growth, supercharged by these hands-off government policies, and that created a massive power imbalance. This imbalance directly sparked the rise of organized labor, which in turn led to all the intense conflicts that really defined the era.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The 8-hour workday, workplace safety standards, the minimum wage, so many things we just take for granted today were born from these incredibly tough struggles. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do the echoes of these old battles, these fights over power, progress, and fairness, still shape our working lives right now?